Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my October book reviews. So you guys know I just started this little section on my channel for September. That was the first time I did book reviews based on books that I'm currently reading. This month's books that I read, it's just two this month, but we have, or I'm sorry, not this month, but for the month of October. And those two books were In Every Mirror She's Black by Lola Akinmade and Ackerson. That was her full name. I just butchered that. In Every Mirror She's Black by Lola Akinmade Ackerson. And I will put a picture of that here in the corner because that was actually my third free Audible selection. So for those who are new here, I did do an Audible trial during Prime Month. They were offering a special where you did 3 months free just to try out like Audible. So with that came a free credit or a free book credit each month. And so that was my third month's book selection. So it's my third and final free book. So that's why I chose that, because the first two books I chose were kind of like autobiographies, biographies, and so I want to do more of like a regular book, so that's why I went with that one, just to see the difference. The second book that I'm going to be talking about is called Secrets by Fern, and that's actually a physical book that I read. And I will get into more information about that one. I do want to note that Secrets was a book that I read as part of an Influenster review. So I was gifted that book through Kensington Publishing and Influenster to read it and provide my honest review. So I just want to note that about the Fern book, but I will also put that in the description as well. And no, making this YouTube video is not part of that, but I just want to put that out there. All right, so let's start with Every Mirror She's Black. That book has a lot in it. It was definitely more than what I thought it would be. I was just thinking it would be just a nice book to read leisurely, nothing too deep, but it's actually lots of layers in there. And so that's why I want to start with that one and then end on a more upbeat note with Secrets. So just a few of the topics that are explored in this particular book: racism, classism, tokenism, fetishism, and then just being a Black woman in a white dominated society. So all of those things are addressed or explored or exhibited somewhere throughout this book. So I can definitely relate to a lot of the situations that some of the women dealt with or found themselves in at some point throughout the book. The book features three women, there are three Black women, and they all end up connected to this one man for three different reasons in Stockholm, Sweden. And so the man's name is Joni. It's spelled like Johnny, but because of the Swedish pronunciation, it's Joni. So Joni is a CEO of a major marketing firm, like one of the largest ones in the world. And the first Black woman that we get introduced to is Kimmy. So the three Black women are Kimmy, Brittany Ray, and Muna. Kimmy is a marketing exec in the US. She works for a big marketing firm. She's like the best of the best at her firm and everything, very well known, whatnot. However, in her personal life, she is the complete opposite. It literally is non-existent. No personal life, no love life. And so when she gets an opportunity to go work for Joni's company in Sweden, she decides to take it and kind of look at it as a fresh start. Like maybe she can, finally find love and find more of a balance between having the successful career and having a successful personal life. However, we do see how that plays out. And with that comes a few areas of self-discovery. So not just for her career, but also with her personal life. And she starts to kind of have some realizations. And that's pretty common for women, probably women of any race, but particularly Black women when it comes to once you hit a certain level or you start hitting certain levels of success, finding an equal partner. And by equal, just meaning someone on the same level. Like if you have a certain level of education in terms of like say a master's or more, or finding someone who a black male counterpart who has that same qualification in terms of education and maybe a job within the same, not necessarily the same salary, but like within the same level or range or tax bracket per se, that decreases. And there are actually statistics that say that that's not just a random, just how it seems like. That's actually statistically true, especially as you get older. So unfortunately, not a great statistic, but that is one. So some of that comes across with Kimmy. But again, Kimmy takes this opportunity in Sweden. She's approached by Yanni, and part of the reason why they want Kimmy there is because the company in Sweden had a major PR, public relations blunder. So basically the company does like, marketing campaigns. So think commercials, ads, whatever. And basically they created one that was culturally insensitive, although they did not intend for it to be culturally insensitive. That just came from the fact that it was a majority white firm targeting a different audience that they were not really culturally familiar with. And so the ad ended up getting a lot of negative blowback. And so they were like, okay, we need to redeem ourselves. So they wanted Kimmy because, one, they know she's a great marketing person, but also because she's black. So that kind of goes into a whole nother thing when you're talking about as a black woman in particular, and a black person, but particularly a black woman, like when you get called in to get these jobs, like while on one hand, yes, it's an awesome opportunity. She gets paid, gets a great salary, gets paid lots of money. And she's also working at one of the top firms, in the country, world renowned, whatever, which that's all great career wise on your resume, whatever. And of course for your bank account. But at the same time, it's like part of the reason that she's there is because not only because she's talented and good, like that is a contributing factor, but because she's black. And so you see that a lot. And so it makes it kind of hard when you are a person of color and you're working and you're trying to move up in your career. And a lot of times you have to ask yourself, like, that you have the skill set and you're actually qualified for the position, or that you can do the job. And that's something that where you deserve to be. However, when you look around your company environment or a company environment, sometimes you do have to ask yourself, like, why am I really here? Now, for some people, it may not matter. They're like, hey, as long as my check clears, I'm good to go. But for other people, they can be bothered by that. And it's also just a sad, unfortunate thing that, like, sometimes you don't get certain opportunities until, one, there's a mess to clean up, or two, they need to have you there because you're black or to fill whatever quota. And there's a difference between being needed somewhere and somewhere wanting you to be there. Now, it's not to say that every company that's a majority white that only has a few black people, the only reason they're there is for diversity purposes. That may not be the case, but a lot of times when you're called in those situations, particularly when it doesn't seem like that company is very big on diversity or really cares too much about having a diverse population or workforce, is because something has happened, or because they need you to fix something in some way, whether it be to meet that quota, or maybe they made a mess like in this situation. And I have definitely been in those situations where, I've been given in my previous career, like I was given certain tasks or assignments that my white counterparts were not given, not because, and we were the same in terms of our same roles. We're both the same type of teacher, both working in the same department, but they gave me certain cases, certain situations, because they knew I could actually do the job, whereas they knew the other person wouldn't or couldn't, but more so wouldn't do what they needed to do in the capacity that they needed it to be done. And we're talking about like with legal things involved. So it was very important that things be done the way they need to be done. But to me, I'm like, that's unfair to say that because I actually do my job and do it well and know it, that I get all of the like tougher situations, and we get paid the same thing. Like, I ain't get no bonus, I don't get anything different. It's not like, if I get paid more to do that, that's different. But when we're on the same level getting the same thing, and you as a supervisor or whatnot know that a person is not doing their job or will not do their job, but yet you just kind of punish the person who is doing their job by giving them all the burnt work. Like, that's not okay. But I've dealt with a lot of those situations, so I definitely can relate to Kimmy. Kind of went sideways on that one a little bit, but I do relate to what Kimmy was dealing with in her profession and when she got called in there. And you'll see that play out throughout the time that she's there, and eventually she does learn to stand up for herself and kind of make those statements and assert herself. And she learns a lot about herself when she takes that opportunity. I have not personally worked abroad, but I have definitely heard a lot of people say that it can be a very life-changing situation in a very positive way. And I think that even though there were some negative aspects of it, the positive is that she learned a lot about herself and she grew in ways that she probably would not have grown had she stayed in her career here in the US. So lots of positivity there, but you'll see her character play out. The next character is Brittany Ray. Brittany Ray is connected to Yanni because she ends up being his love interest. So they meet on a flight. She's a former model turned flight attendant. So Yanni is on this flight, and I want to say it's the flight that he's actually taking to the US from Sweden to go talk to Kimmy about taking that position with his company. And he encounters Brittany as a flight attendant, and he just falls in love with her, kind of a love at first sight type thing. And so he starts to pursue her. At that time, she is in a relationship with someone, and so you'll see how all of that plays out and how everything develops. But one of the things with Brittany Ray is, again, over the course of time, she starts to learn some things about Yanni that kind of make her wonder, like, okay, does he really love me? Like, is he really attracted to me for me? Or does it have something to do with more of he has like a thing for black women, like a fetish, to not just a preference, but a fetish? And there's a difference there. And I'll get back to Yanni in a second because all of that comes out as well, and that does have something to do with Yanni as a whole in the book. The last character that we run into is Muna, and Muna is actually a refugee. I can't remember which country it was from. I think from maybe like a Middle Eastern country, but their country is at war, a lot of unrest, and so they flee to Sweden. And so she ends up working for Yanni's company as like basically a custodian. She's like cleaning the toilets, but she has to do that in order to establish herself so that she can apply for like citizenship and residency in Sweden. So she was able to get a job within his company. So that is how all three women tie into the one man, which is Yanni. You have Kimmy, who works for the company, Brittany Ray, who's the love interest, and then Muna, who also works for the company at a lower capacity. So the other thing that ties into all of this is going back to the whole tokenism and fetishism. So Kimmy kind of falls into that token. She's like the token black person because she's the only like black person on the, as you say, marketing board or whatnot. And so in the company, and again, she's pulled in, one, to add diversity to the company, and two, because she's trying to fix basically a diversity nightmare that they had going on. So that's where that tokenism comes in. So sometimes, what we sometimes term as the token Negro, that's what she was, essentially. But again, she learned how to work that to her advantage. Brittany Ray kind of falls into the fetishism because, again, like I said, when you learn a little bit more about Yanni, you start to see like you start to wonder like whether or not he just has a thing for black women, or what it is about that as to why he was so attracted to Brittany Ray and why he tends to just have a general attraction to women of color. And then being a black woman in a white dominated society, and if you see me keep looking down, it's because I made notes just to make sure I point out some of these key things. But being a black woman in a white dominated society, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. That comes down with Kimmy, is that you have to assert yourself, and it's still, even though you can be the best or whatnot, you're not always going to be viewed the same way or given the same opportunities simply because you may be a woman or because you're a person of color. And honestly, like I said before, when it comes to some of these top positions, and I'll give examples since my former background or careers with education, if you look around now, you see a lot more people of color in administrative roles, being like superintendents, principals, assistant principals, or whatnot. If you really look into those school systems and look into their history in terms of those positions, you'll see that primarily a lot of those had white people, whether it be male or female. Usually it was males, but sometimes females. And now that the system is probably failing, struggling, a Title I school, which means that those schools, probably 60% or more of the population lives at or below the poverty level. Any of those kind of negative things that are happening, then that's when they bring in the reinforcements, aka the Black people or the people of color. So that kind of happened a lot in the career, especially in the area where I live, where a majority of these school systems are run by majority white upper people, or at least they were, and now you're starting to see more people of color come in, even though the student body is not that. They're not representative of what the student body tends to look like, but that's kind of how it is, and that goes back to the whole functioning in a white-dominated society piece. So you have that. And the last thing that I want to talk about with that book is that Yanni, there's things about Yanni that you start to learn, and the author doesn't come right out and say it, but they do drop hints or notes that kind of help you get to that conclusion. And she does say it at the end, but Yanni has autism. And so the one thing, or the one point, that's not a spoiler or anything, it's like, because they do mention it throughout the book, and I'm not saying that it plays a huge role in some of the things that he does, but it does factor into some parts of the story, and you'll see that play out. But the author does note that he has autism, and at the very end they do come to that conclusion, which is kind of like an awareness thing, or it even talks about, you know, how autism is typically viewed, like when it first kind of became a thing, is it used to be looked at as more of a thing of shame, and people didn't want to acknowledge, you know, or kind of advertise that their child had autism, particularly in the white community, particularly in wealthy communities. And even now, I'm not saying that everybody has overcome it, but it's a lot more well-known. People don't hide behind it, and you know, people aren't necessarily ashamed of their children. People get their children the resources, early intervention, all of that stuff, which can be very, very helpful. The earlier, the better, which is why there's a big push now for, you know, autism assessments and all of that at early ages, so that if a child does exhibit some of those signs, they can go ahead and start getting the resources that they need to help them progress, so that they don't get so far behind. Because like any other possibly cognitive delay or whatnot, the earlier you can get to it and start working on it and helping the child develop and figuring out ways to do what they need to do to be successful, the better. And so Brittany Ray eventually confronts his family, because I think Yanni is the only boy, and I want to say he had 2 or 3 sisters. And so they were saying, you know, he was like the golden child, and, you know, he was the boy. And we know that sometimes how in families, particularly like wealthy families and all that, where it's like, you know, you want to have that son to pass things down to and blah, 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 that situation. That's kind of how their family was. And so Brittany's like, you know, why didn't your family, given that you guys had all this money, you could pretty much get any resource, anything you needed to help him out, why didn't you guys get him help when he was a child? Because they acknowledged that they did realize he was different, and that he, you know, that he was not like the other children, and some of the behaviors that he exhibited when he would get like upset or whatnot were different. And they knew something was different about him, but they didn't acknowledge it. And they did not get him, you know, any help or assistance to help him learn how to manage that and how to deal with that. And so Brittany's saying, why didn't y'all do that? Because y'all could afford to do that and get him anything he needed, and probably could have helped him, you know, a little bit, adjust a little bit better into adulthood, even though he's doing fine now as best he can. But I mean, she's just saying like he could have been even better had you guys like acknowledged and, you know, intervened. And so the sister is pretty much saying is, you know, our family was pretty much ashamed. They didn't want to acknowledge the fact that he did have autism, or that he was different. And one of the things that the author also points out is that as a society as a whole, we tend to want to fit in, and we don't want to make people feel different, because we always look at it like, oh, if you feel different, you might feel bad about yourself. And so we want you to feel included, even though we know like you are different. We don't want to acknowledge those differences so that you don't feel excluded, or so that you don't feel any kind of way negatively about yourself. But at the same time, that can also be harmful, because not acknowledging those differences also doesn't help that person learn how to exist in a world that's kind of structured one way. And if you're outside that box or outside that line, like, how do you navigate that? And so that's a message that the author kind of touches on at the very end, which I really appreciated. And then the last thing that the author talks about or addresses is suicide, because unfortunately one of the characters does end up taking that route. And so they want to, of course, acknowledge that, and also acknowledge the fact that if you are feeling that way, or that's, your thought, you feeling like that's your only answer to whatever you have going on, so please reach out for help. You're never alone. And the information is provided for suicide help hotline. So that is something that the author talks about in the Audible. Like I said, I read this on Audible. I would recommend probably buying this book and reading it either on your Kindle or reading a hard copy, just because with the different characters, the way the story is written, each chapter kind of goes back and forth between the characters, so listening to it can be sometimes hard to keep up with whose story you're in, especially in the beginning. Once you kind of learn the storyline, you know who they're talking about, but in the beginning and learning it, like, it can be a little difficult to figure out like which character they're talking about. So I would say having a physical copy, whether it be digital Kindle or something just to look at, might be easier to read and kind of navigate more than the Audible. But other than that, that's not a negative on the book. That was just the style in terms of what you're trying to get out of it might be a little bit easier. So overall, I did enjoy that book, and like I said, it had way more layers than I thought, but it was definitely a worthy read and also something a little different. All right, so again, that was In Every Mirror She's Black, and I will put both books down below that I talk about in case you're interested in checking them out. All right, so the second book, a lot more upbeat, definitely a leisure, laid-back read, and that is Secrets by Fern Michaels. This is the second Fern Michaels book that I read, and her style, I've come to kind of get to know her writing style, and I do appreciate it. The only negative about her style so far that I've seen is that she does an excellent job in building the characters. Her characters are super relatable, at least in my opinion. You can learn to like them. You can see yourself in them a lot of times. She does a great job building it up, giving you details, information. You can visualize whatever you need to visualize. You can really get into the story. And so it's like a slow roller coaster where you're going up that hill, and she takes her time and does great getting you up there. And then you get to the top and you stop. So that would be the climax. And that's where you hit that problem. And then the problem's solved. And it's like you get to the top, solve the problem, and then whoosh. That is how her stories end. It's like once they address the problem and solve it, it's like the end of the book. Like literally the problem is solved, and it's like 5 pages or less after that. So you never, in my opinion, you never really get a full conclusion or closure. Like you do know what happened in terms, but it's kind of like, oh, so-and-so got together and they live happily ever after. Like, it's kind of like one of those things, like, where you want to see, like, oh, they got married, they had some kids. Like, you want more of the details, but it's just kind of like, and they all live happily ever after. But that's kind of how the endings of her books that I've read so far go. And that's the one negative that I don't like about her writing style from what I've read so far. Now, I haven't read all her books, so some of them may not end or may not, flow like that. But that's my only flaw. But in terms of this specific book, Secrets, it is part of a Lost and Found, is like a collection or whatever. But I don't know. I don't think the books fall with each other like the first book, and then this is book 2 in that series. But I don't think they're connected in the sense of like the same characters. But I don't know because I haven't read book 1 or the book after this. So I have to look and see. But in this book, we have Cullen and Luna, who are brother and sister. It takes place in a small town, North Carolina. And again, you guys know I'm from North Carolina, so very relatable to me on a personal note, which most of her books that I've read or stories that I've read so far are. I think she being the author, Fern Michaels, actually lives in South Carolina. So a lot of her books take place in the South, North or South Carolina, coastal area. A lot of times very relatable to me. So Cullen and Luna, they are brother and sister. They Cullen owns a furniture restoration business. Think like Main Street downtown. So you have Cullen's business. You also have like a cafe. You have a jewelry shop that's owned by Chi Chi, which is another main character in here. She's very good friends with Luna and Cullen. And then you have like an art gallery museum type thing. And Luna gives me like that person who would be like that kind of artsy person, you know, that you would see with the flowy outfits and bangles or something like that. She just kind of gives me like the hippie vibe, but just like that cool hippie chick. Like that's what vibes Luna gives. And the other thing about Luna is she kind of has like a psychic ability, but it's not something that's like spooky, scary. It's more like, you know, if she touches something that belongs to somebody, she might get a vibe or she might get like a little vision or whatever. So that part is kind of thrown in there, but it's not in a scary or like real deep way. It's just kind of like her little special powers, sixth sense type thing. And so her previous job, like she does work with her brother and she works in the cafe and she does do readings for people, like kind of like psychic readings for people, but it's like she keeps it low key. So she doesn't like advertise like, hey, I'm a psychic, like come get readings. It's kind of like word of mouth. So it's like if we're friends and I know she reads, and I might tell like one of my friends like, hey, if you want to do that, like you can go see Luna. That's kind of how her business works. So that's what she does. But because of that ability, she has worked her previous job. She was working as like a social worker or with like helping to find like missing children and missing people type cases, which also leads her to become introduced to this U.S. Marshal, who is her love interest in the story. And they're kind of like kids where it's like they both like each other and they both kind of know that they like each other, but no one really wants to make that move across the line beyond friendship. But like when they're around each other, they're super like flirty and all of that. So you just have that kind of playing out. So that storyline plays out throughout the book as well. But the one thing, or the main big picture in this, is that her brother gets this mysterious trunk, like a storage trunk, that is delivered to him. It has no return address. It's only given like a note that has information with, you know, how to contact the person if you need to, but there's no name. He's given $1,000 check to cash to pay for the restoration, because like I said, he does do like restoration. So it's an old trunk. It has been exposed to fire, in a fire or near a fire. They can tell that it has that smoky look. And so basically he's going to restore this trunk, and the person is saying like, here's $1,000 to get you started. If you need more money, like here's how to, you know, do that correspondence. But again, it's no name, no identity. So that's the mystery of the book, is trying to figure out what's the deal with this trunk and why the person that sent it is remaining or trying to remain anonymous, or, you know, whatever. And so Luna is kind of like on the case. And when she goes to touch the trunk, she gets, you know, like a little vision that's related to the trunk or in the owner. So she's trying to figure out like who the owner is or what the story is behind that trunk and the potential owner or owners. So she sees this vision, and so that's kind of how that story is playing out. But along the way, you also have the combination of the love interest between Luna and that U.S. Marshal, and then you also have her brother Cullen, who also has a little similar situation with one of her friends, Chi, which is the owner of the jewelry shop, and you see their whole little situation play out too. So it's a very, like I said, lighthearted, easy read, leisure. You're not going to use a lot of brain cells, you know, trying to figure out what's going on. And I'll say, honestly, I probably put together the pieces very near the end, about 3/4 through the book. I kind of put all the pieces together and saw like where everything connected. The other part of that story, like that's the heart of it. But then the external piece is that it is there's another lady who lives nearby, not in the same town, but nearby, and she is having some marital problems. Her and her husband ran off right after their high school graduation at like 18, got married and never looked back. And so they have one child. He's now grown. I think he was joining the military or had joined the military. So there's no one in the house, just the two of them. And the husband is a police officer. He does his thing. Usually he's hanging out with his, you know, police buddies, and she goes to work. She's a paralegal for like the little in-town divorce lawyer. And again, small town vibes here. And so she finds out, she's almost 40. I think she's like 37, 38. She finds out that she is pregnant. And so the whole, one, that's a huge surprise. And two, she's like, you know, she was contemplating divorcing her husband because she wasn't happy in the marriage. She felt like they were drifting apart and that he didn't even care or want to be, married, because of course when they ran off at 18, they had this vision of building this wonderful, beautiful life, and it didn't quite work out like that. Their life is not horrible, but it is by no means what they wanted or what they thought they would have. And so she's like, okay, I'm almost 40. My one child is grown, and I'm in a marriage that I'm not happy with. And so I'm contemplating leaving that, and now I have this baby. What to do? Like, so she's trying to decide, should I even tell him? Should I keep the baby? Should I have an abortion? Like, adoption? Like, what should I do? So she's got all that going on, and she does have a connection to Luna eventually, and you'll see all that play out. So her life, or her storyline, kind of ends up intertwining with Cullen and Luna and Chi-Chi in their storyline, and so you'll see all that come together. So when it starts off, they seem like there's two separate situations going on, and then you start to eventually see how they intertwine. So that's how that book plays out. And again, this is Fern Michael's Secrets. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching my book reviews. Like I said, I'll keep these coming. I have no idea what's going to be up next. I can't even give you a sneak peek on that. But there'll probably both be hard copy books, or at least books I read either via Kindle or whatnot. I have tons of books that are waiting to be read. I've also created a good list of books that are to get to eventually. So again, if you guys have any suggestions of good books that are out that you may want to throw at me, feel free to drop those in the comments down below, and that can also help me build my library, because like I said, I'm trying to get back into reading, and I do have quite a bit of books, and like I said, I used to teach English. I've read a lot of specifically young adult things, so I am open to any amount of genres, any level, whatever the case may be. My preferences tend to be, like, I like historical fiction, I like books by Black authors, or people of color, Black, Hispanic authors, whatever, diversity. As you can tell, this book's completely like, this is like one of those books you pick up when you're going to the beach or on vacation. So wide range, open to anything. Just drop it down below, and I'll at least check it out. So thanks again for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.